The winter of 1927 was brutal in Palm Beach. The wind tore through the palm fronds, rattling the windows of the cottages that lined the narrow barrier island where America's wealthiest families came to escape the cold. But on the southern tip of the island, where the land stretched out toward the Atlantic like a reaching hand, something impossible was taking shape. A fortress, a palace, a monument to wealth so excessive that it would become, decades later, the most controversial address in America. Mar-a-Lago, the name means Cita Lake in Spanish, and the estate would stretch from the Atlantic Ocean to Lake Worth, consuming 17 acres of the most valuable land in Florida. The woman behind it was Marjorie Merriweather Post, an heiress whose fortune was so vast that when adjusted for inflation, her wealth would exceed $20 billion in today's money. She was not simply rich. She was American royalty, the sole heir to the Postum Cereal Company fortune, which would eventually become General Foods Corporation, one of the largest food conglomerates in the world. And she wanted a winter home that would proclaim her status to everyone who saw it. The construction began with obsession. Marjorie hired Marion Sims Wyeth, the architect who had already designed dozens of mansions for the Palm Beach elite, but this would be his masterpiece. She also brought in Joseph Urban, a Viennese architect and set designer who had worked on operas and Broadway productions. This was not going to be a home. This was going to be theater. The plans called for 128 rooms, 50, 8 bedrooms, 30, 3 bathrooms, and a ballroom that could hold more than 200 guests. The estate would have its own power plant, its own switchboard, and a staff of 60 people just to keep it running. The operating costs alone, even in the 1920s, were staggering, equivalent to over $500,000 per year in modern currency, just to keep the lights on and the gardens manicured. If these stories make you pause, if you find yourself curious about what drives people to build empires that consume them, then you're in the right place. These investigations take time, and your support makes them possible. The materials were insane. Marjorie didn't just want luxury, she wanted history. She imported 36,000 Spanish tiles from the 1,005, hundreds reclaimed from the rooftops of old Cuban estates. She purchased entire Venetian stonework panels, marble columns from ancient Italian villas, and ornate ceilings from European palaces. Workers were shipped in from across the country, many of them Italian craftsmen who specialized in the kind of delicate masonry that hadn't been seen in America since the Gilded Age. The labor force swelled to over 300 men at the peak of construction, all working under brutal Florida heat and humidity, all racing to complete the impossible before the next winter season began. The cost was astronomical. By the time Mar-a-Lago was finished in 1927, Marjorie had spent $7 million, a sum that translates to roughly $120 million today when adjusted for inflation. But that number doesn't capture the true financial bleed. The ongoing maintenance, the staff salaries, the constant repairs from salt air and hurricanes, the property taxes on 17 acres of prime ocean, front land, all of it added up to a liquidity crisis that would haunt the estate for decades. Marjorie could afford it barely, but the moment her fortune wavered, the entire structure became unsustainable. And yet, when it was finished, Mar-a-Lago was breathtaking. The main house rose 3 stories, its exterior a dazzling combination of cream-colored stone and those ancient Spanish tiles, giving it the appearance of a Mediterranean castle that had somehow materialized on the Florida coast. The entrance opened into a hallway lined with hand-painted tiles depicting scenes from Spanish history, leading to the living room, which featured a ceiling imported piece by piece from an Italian palazzo. The ballroom had gold, leafed columns, crystal chandeliers, and French doors that opened onto terraces overlooking the ocean. Marjorie's bedroom suite had its own sitting room, bathroom with gold fixtures, and a private balcony. The dining room could seat 40 guests at a single table, beneath a ceiling covered in intricate plasterwork that had been crafted by artisans who had trained in Vienna. The estate had its own 9-hole golf course, a private beach, a bomb shelter, underground tunnels connecting different parts of the property, and a tower, a strange, fortified structure that looked like it belonged on a Spanish fort, not a Florida mansion. Everything about it screamed power, wealth, control, and for a few golden years, that's exactly what Marjorie had. But beneath the beauty there was already rot. The servants saw it first. The staff of 60 people, maids, cooks, gardeners, chauffeurs, butlers, and groundskeepers, lived in cramped quarters on the estate, working 12-hour days for wages that barely covered their expenses. Many of them were black or immigrant workers, invisible to the guests who attended Marjorie's lavish parties. They scrubbed the marble floors, polished the gold fixtures, pruned the hedges, and served champagne on silver trays, all while living in conditions that would be considered inhumane by today's standards. The operating costs that kept Mar-a-Lago running were not just financial, they were human. And the workers paid the price. One story stands out. Her name was Lily Watkins, a young black woman who worked as a housemaid at Mar-a-Lago in the early 1930s. She was paid $30 a month, equivalent to about $600 today, and worked 6 days a week, often without breaks. She lived in a small room in the servants' quarters with 3 other women, sleeping on a narrow cot with thin blankets. In the winter, the rooms were cold. In the summer, they were stifling. Lily's job was to clean the guest bedrooms, which meant scrubbing floors, changing linens, and making sure every surface was spotless before the wealthy visitors arrived. She once told her daughter, years later, that she had never set foot in the ballroom when it was lit up for a party. She had only seen it in the morning, when the chandeliers were off and the floors were sticky with champagne and mud. Lily's story is not unique. Dozens of workers like her spent years at Mar-a-Lago, their labor erased from the official histories, their names forgotten. The estate's beauty was built on their backs, and the cost of maintaining that beauty consumed them. Before we go further, ask yourself this: what is the true cost of a dream that requires others to sacrifice their lives to sustain it? Marjorie Merriweather Post was not a villain in the traditional sense. She was, by all accounts, a complicated woman. She donated millions to charity, funded hospitals, and supported the arts. She was a shrewd businesswoman who expanded her father's company into a global empire, proving that women could lead corporations at a time when most were excluded from boardrooms. She married 4 times, each marriage ending in divorce, each one a spectacle covered by the press. Her personal life was turbulent, marked by loneliness despite the constant presence of staff and guests. She collected art, jewelry, and Fabergé eggs, amassing one of the most valuable private collections in the world. She was brilliant, ambitious, and deeply lonely, but she was also blind to the world outside her gates. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, just 2 years after Mar-a-Lago was completed, the American economy collapsed. Unemployment soared to 25%. Banks failed. Families lost their homes. People stood in bread lines, desperate for food. And in Palm Beach, behind the walls of Mar-a-Lago, Marjorie continued to host parties. The champagne still flowed. The orchestras still played. The guests still danced in the ballroom, oblivious to the suffering outside. The estate became a symbol of everything wrong with American wealth. While workers across the country were laid off and evicted, Marjorie's staff continued to tend to her gardens, polish her silver, and serve her meals. The operating costs of Mar-a-Lago during the Depression were equivalent to the annual salaries of 50 factory workers. The irony was suffocating. The estate that was supposed to represent the pinnacle of American success had become a monument to inequality. And the financial bleed never stopped. Marjorie spent millions maintaining Mar-a-Lago over the decades, but the costs only grew. By the 1950s, the estate required a full-time maintenance crew just to fight the effects of the salt air, which corroded the metalwork, damaged the tiles, and ate away at the stonework. The hurricanes were relentless, tearing through the property every few years, ripping off roof tiles, flooding the underground tunnels, and destroying the landscaping. Insurance costs skyrocketed. Property taxes climbed as the value of Palm Beach real estate exploded, and inflation eroded the value of Marjorie's fortune, making it harder to justify the expense. By the 1960s, Marjorie was in her 70s, and she began to face a hard truth. Mar-a-Lago was unsustainable. The estate was too large, too expensive, and too tied to a vision of wealth that was becoming obsolete. The new generation of billionaires didn't want massive, labor-intensive estates. They wanted simplicity, privacy, and efficiency. Mar-a-Lago was none of those things. It was a relic, a beautiful, crumbling relic that was slowly devouring whatever remained of the fortune that built it. So Marjorie made a decision. She would give Mar-a-Lago to the American people. In her will, she stipulated that upon her death, the estate would be donated to the federal government to be used as a winter retreat for sitting presidents and visiting foreign dignitaries. It was a grand gesture, a final act of patriotism from a woman who had always seen herself as a custodian of American greatness. She died in 1973, and Mar-a-Lago passed into the hands of the government, but the government didn't want it. The National Park Service took one look at the operating costs, estimated at over $1 million per year in the 1970s, and balked. The estate was too expensive to maintain, too difficult to secure, and too impractical for use as a presidential retreat. Camp David, the official presidential retreat in Maryland, was already established and far easier to manage. No president wanted to vacation in a massive, drafty mansion that required a small army of staff just to keep it functional. And so Mar-a-Lago sat empty, the gardens grew wild, the roof tiles fell, the salt air continued its slow work of decay. If you're still watching this, you're not here for surface-level stories. You're here because you understand that wealth and power are never simple, and that the most fascinating truths are the ones buried beneath the spectacle. For nearly a decade, Mar-a-Lago rotted. The estate, once the jewel of Palm Beach, became an embarrassment. The government tried to find a buyer, but no one wanted it. The maintenance costs were too high, the property taxes were crushing, and the entire structure was outdated. Who in their right mind would want to own a 120 a true mansion that cost millions of dollars per year just to keep standing? And then, in 1985, a real estate developer from New York saw an opportunity. His name was Donald Trump. Trump purchased Mar-a-Lago for $10 million, a fraction of what Marjorie had spent to build it, and a steal compared to its appraised value of over $20 million. But Trump wasn't buying it as a home. He was buying it as a business. He immediately applied to convert the estate into a private club, a members-only resort where the ultra-wealthy could pay exorbitant fees for access to the property. The town of Palm Beach fought him. The old, money families who had lived there for generations despised Trump, seeing him as a crass outsider who didn't understand the unwritten rules of their world. They filed lawsuits, blocked his permits, and tried everything they could to stop him, but Trump won. He always wins, or at least, he always finds a way to spin the story so that it looks like he's won. By 1995, Mar-a-Lago had been transformed into a private club. Membership cost $100,000 with annual fees of $14,000. Trump kept a private residence in the estate for himself, occupying the same rooms that Marjorie had once lived in, but the rest of the property was open to paying members. The ballroom was rented out for weddings. The dining room hosted galas. The beach became a playground for the children of billionaires. And the operating costs, they were now someone else's problem. The membership fees covered the maintenance, the staff salaries, the property taxes, and the constant repairs. Trump had found a way to make Mar-a-Lago profitable, turning a crumbling monument to Gilded Age excess into a functioning business. It was, in many ways, a brilliant move. He had taken an asset that no one wanted and turned it into a gold mine, a members only resort that attracted celebrities, politicians, and business moguls from around the world. But the transformation came at a cost. The estate that Marjorie had built as a private sanctuary, a place where she could escape the pressures of public life, had become a spectacle. The exclusivity she had prized was now for sale to anyone with enough money to afford the membership fee. The beauty she had carefully curated was now a backdrop for weddings, parties, and political fundraisers. Mar-a-Lago was no longer a home, it was a brand, and when Trump became president in 2016, the estate took on a new, darker role. It became the Winter White House, a place where Trump conducted official government business, hosted foreign leaders, and held strategy meetings. The members of the club who had paid for access to luxury and exclusivity now found themselves rubbing elbows with cabinet members, senators, and diplomats. The line between private business and public office blurred in ways that legal experts found deeply troubling. Was Trump using the presidency to enrich his private club? Were club members gaining access to the president in exchange for their membership fees? The questions piled up, and the lawsuits followed. But what haunts the story of Mar-a-Lago is not just the legal controversies or the political scandals. It's the deeper question of what the estate represents. Marjorie Merriweather Post built it as a monument to American ambition, a place where wealth and power could be displayed without shame. She believed that beauty and grandeur were virtues, that building something magnificent was a way of honoring the fortune she had inherited. But the estate she built became a trap, a financial and emotional burden that consumed her fortune and outlived her vision. And now, decades later, Mar-a-Lago has become something else entirely, a symbol of a different kind of American ambition, one that sees everything art, history, beauty, power, as something to be monetized, packaged, and sold. The estate that was once a private sanctuary for one of the wealthiest women in the world is now a members only club where access can be purchased. The ballroom where Marjorie danced with presidents and movie stars is now available for rent. The beach where she walked alone at sunset is now crowded with the children of hedge fund managers. If this moment made you feel something, anger, sadness, or just a deep unease, that feeling is a signal. It's worth acknowledging, it's worth marking, because stories like this only matter if we let them change how we see the world. The human cost of Mar-a-Lago did not end with the servants who scrubbed its floors in the 1930s. It continues today in the form of the workers who staff the club, the housekeepers who clean the guest rooms, the cooks who prepare the meals, and the groundskeepers who maintain the 17 acres of gardens and lawns. These workers are largely invisible, just as they were in Marjorie's time. They work long hours for wages that are low compared to the cost of living in Palm Beach, one of the wealthiest zip codes in America. Many of them are immigrants, brought in through visa programs that allow the club to hire temporary foreign workers instead of paying higher wages to American employees. The irony is brutal. A club owned by a president who campaigned on anti-immigration rhetoric relies on immigrant labor to function. In 2019, the Washington Post reported that Mar-a-Lago had requested permission to hire 78 foreign workers for the season, including cooks, housekeepers, and servers. The club claimed it couldn't find enough American workers willing to take the jobs, despite the fact that unemployment in Palm Beach County was relatively low. Critics pointed out that the club could easily attract American workers if it paid higher wages and offered better benefits, but that would cut into the profit margins. So instead, the club relied on a system that allowed it to hire temporary workers at lower wages, workers who had little power to negotiate for better conditions and who could be deported if they complained. This is the dark side of generational wealth and the businesses it creates. The profit is private, but the cost is public. The beauty is visible, but the labor that sustains it is hidden. And the people who benefit from the system are insulated from the people who pay the price. One former housekeeper, who spoke to reporters anonymously for fear of retaliation, described working at Mar-a-Lago as exhausting and demeaning. She said she was expected to clean multiple guest rooms per day, each one to an impossibly high standard, while being paid minimum wage with no benefits. She worked 6 days a week, often without breaks, and lived in a small apartment she shared with 3 other workers. When she injured her back lifting a heavy mattress, she was told to take unpaid leave. She couldn't afford to miss work, so she kept going, relying on painkillers to get through the day. Eventually, her visa expired, and she returned to her home country, her back still damaged, her savings nearly gone. Stories like hers are common in the hospitality industry, especially at high-end resorts and private clubs where the appearance of effortless luxury is maintained by the invisible labor of underpaid workers, but at Mar-a-Lago, the contrast is especially stark. The members pay $100,000 to join and $14,000 per year in fees, dining on gourmet meals and relaxing in rooms that are clean to perfection, while the workers who make that experience possible struggle to pay rent and put food on the table. The wealth gap is not abstract. It is physical, visceral, and brutal. And the financial bleed continues. Despite the membership fees and the revenue from events, Mar-a-Lago is still expensive to maintain. The hurricanes keep coming, each one causing millions of dollars in damage. In 2005, Hurricane Wilma tore through Palm Beach, ripping tiles off the roof and flooding parts of the estate. In 2017, Hurricane Irma caused similar damage, requiring extensive repairs that took months to complete. The salt air continues to corrode the metalwork and damage the stonework, requiring constant maintenance. And the property taxes on 17 acres of oceanfront land in Palm Beach are astronomical, running into the millions of dollars per year. Trump has claimed that the estate is worth over $300 million, but independent appraisers have questioned that figure, pointing out that the property's value is tied to its use as a private club, not as a single family residence. If the club were to lose its operating license, the estate would be worth far less, possibly even becoming a liability due to the high operating costs. And there are legal challenges. The town of Palm Beach has strict zoning laws that limit how the estate can be used, and there have been ongoing disputes about whether Trump is violating those laws by using Mar-a-Lago as a residence while it is licensed as a club. The controversies multiplied after Trump left office in 2021. In August 2022, the FBI executed a search warrant at Mar-a-Lago, seizing hundreds of classified documents that Trump had allegedly taken from the White House. The search made headlines around the world, turning the estate into the center of a federal investigation. Trump claimed the documents were his personal property, declassified by his authority as president. Federal prosecutors argued that the documents were government property, that Trump had obstructed efforts to retrieve them, and that his possession of them posed a national security risk. The legal battle is still ongoing as of now, but the damage to Mar-a-Lago's reputation was immediate. The estate that had once been a symbol of wealth and power was now associated with scandal, secrecy, and potential criminal activity. If you're still here, it's because you understand that these stories are not entertainment, they are mirrors. And what they reflect is uncomfortable. If that discomfort matters to you, if you believe that understanding these patterns is the first step to changing them, then staying connected to this work matters. But the classified documents scandal is just the latest chapter in a much longer story of controversy. Over the years, Mar-a-Lago has been the site of numerous incidents that raised ethical and legal questions. In 2017, Trump hosted a dinner meeting at the club with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, discussing North Korea's missile tests in the middle of the dining room, surrounded by paying club members who snapped photos and posted them on social media. Security experts were horrified, pointing out that sensitive national security discussions were being conducted in a public space where anyone with a cell phone could record or photograph classified information. In 2019, a Chinese businesswoman named Yujing Zhang was arrested at Mar-a-Lago after gaining access to the club while carrying multiple electronic devices, including a thumb drive containing malware. She was later convicted of trespassing and lying to federal agents, but the incident raised serious questions about the club's security. How had she gained access? Were there other foreign nationals who had entered the club under false pretenses? And what information had they been able to gather while inside? These incidents reveal a fundamental problem with Mar-a-Lago's dual role as both a private club and a presidential residence. The security requirements for a sitting or former president are extraordinarily high, requiring Secret Service protection, restricted access, and constant monitoring. But the business model of a private club depends on openness, accessibility, and the ability of members to come and go freely. The two functions are incompatible, and the result is a security nightmare. And yet, Trump continues to use Mar-a-Lago as his primary residence, hosting events, conducting business, and meeting with political allies. The estate has become his fortress, his sanctuary, and his brand. It is the physical embodiment of his identity, a place where he can control the narrative, surround himself with loyalists, and project an image of wealth and power. But it is also a trap, a financial and legal liability that ties him to a property with a dark and complicated history. Marjorie Merriweather Post could never have imagined what her estate would become. She built it as a monument to beauty, a place where art, history, and culture could be preserved and celebrated. She filled it with treasures from around the world, hoping that future generations would appreciate the craftsmanship and care that went into every detail. But the estate she built has become something very different, a business, a political headquarters, and a symbol of everything that is broken about American wealth. The question that haunts Mar-a-Lago is the same question that haunts every monument to extreme wealth. Who pays the price? Marjorie paid with her fortune, pouring millions into a property that consumed her wealth and outlived her vision. The servants paid with their labor, scrubbing floors and tending gardens for wages that barely sustained them. The workers today pay with their bodies, their time, and their dignity, maintaining a level of luxury that they will never be able to afford for themselves. And the American people pay with their trust, watching as a former president uses a private club as a base of operations, blurring the line between public service and private profit in ways that corrode faith in democratic institutions. The financial mechanics of Mar-a-Lago are a masterclass in how wealth insulates itself from consequences. Trump bought the estate for $10 million, converted it into a private club, and used the membership fees to cover the operating costs. He took a property that was financially unsustainable and turned it into a revenue-generating asset. But the revenue is private, while the costs, the security, the infrastructure, the legal battles are increasingly public. Taxpayers funded the Secret Service protection when Trump was president. Local governments in Palm Beach bear the burden of increased traffic, security concerns, and the disruption caused by Trump's presence. And the legal system is now dealing with the fallout from the classified documents case, a case that could have serious national security implications. This is how generational wealth works. The profits are privatized and the costs are socialized. The beauty is visible, but the burden is hidden. And the people who benefit from the system are the ones who have the power to shape the narrative, to control the story, and to ensure that the price is paid by someone else. There is a photograph of Marjorie Merriweather Post taken in the 1960s, near the end of her life. She is standing on the terrace at Mar-a-Lago, looking out at the ocean. She is dressed in a formal gown, her jewelry glittering in the sunlight, her expression serene. Behind her, the estate stretches out, its gardens perfectly manicured, its walls gleaming. She looks like a queen surveying her kingdom, but if you look closely, you can see something else in her expression: exhaustion. A quiet sadness, the knowledge that the kingdom she built is too large, too expensive, and too fragile to last. She spent her entire adult life maintaining Mar-a-Lago, pouring money into its upkeep, fighting to preserve its beauty. But in the end, it outlasted her. It outlasted her vision, her values, and her fortune. And now, decades after her death, the estate she built as a monument to American ambition has become a symbol of American excess, inequality, and corruption. If this story has made you think, if it's changed how you see wealth, power, and the cost of ambition, then it has done its job. These investigations take time, research, and resources. If you value this kind of storytelling, the kind that doesn't look away from uncomfortable truths, then your support keeps it alive. Subscribing, sharing, or simply staying engaged, it all matters. The future of Mar-a-Lago is uncertain. Trump is aging, and the legal battles surrounding him show no signs of ending. If he were to lose control of the estate, either through financial pressure or legal consequences, what would happen to it? Would it remain a private club, continuing to operate as a business? Would it be sold to another billionaire, becoming yet another trophy property for someone with more money than sense? Or would it finally be repurposed, perhaps as a museum or a public space, allowing people to see the grandeur and the grotesqueness of gilded age wealth up close? There is a tragic irony in the idea of Mar-a-Lago becoming a museum. Marjorie always wanted her estate to be appreciated by the public, to be preserved as a work of art and a testament to American craftsmanship. But she also wanted it to remain exclusive, a private sanctuary where only the wealthy and powerful could enter. The two desires were always incompatible, and that incompatibility is what doomed her vision from the start. You cannot build something beautiful and then lock it away. Beauty demands to be shared, to be experienced, to be made accessible. And wealth, by its nature, is about exclusivity, about keeping others out. This is the core contradiction at the heart of Mar-a-Lago, and at the heart of so much of American wealth. The desire to build something magnificent is admirable. The craftsmanship, the artistry, the ambition, all of it is worthy of respect. But when that magnificence is built on the backs of underpaid workers, when it is maintained through systems of exploitation and exclusivity, and when it is used to project power and control rather than to enrich the public good, then it becomes something darker. It becomes a monument not to human achievement, but to human greed. The servants who worked at Mar-a-Lago in the 1930s are all gone now, their names lost to history. But their labor is still there, embedded in the tiles they scrubbed, the floors they polished, and the gardens they tended. Lily Watkins, the housemaid who never saw the ballroom lit up for a party, is buried in a small cemetery in West Palm Beach, her grave marked by a simple stone with no mention of the years she spent at Mar-a-Lago. She died in 1968, 5 years before Marjorie, having worked as a maid for most of her life. She never owned property, never traveled abroad, never experienced the kind of wealth and luxury that she helped maintain for others. Her story is a reminder that every monument to wealth is also a monument to inequality, and that the cost of grandeur is always paid by the people who have the least. Trump, for his part, has turned Mar-a-Lago into a different kind of monument. Where Marjorie saw art and beauty, he sees branding and profit. Where she sought exclusivity through taste and refinement, he sells it through membership fees and access to power. And where she tried to give the estate to the American people, he has claimed it as his own, using it as a fortress against his enemies and a stage for his political ambitions. The estate has come full circle, returning to the hands of someone who sees it not as a home, but as a tool. And yet, for all the darkness, for all the exploitation and controversy, Mar-a-Lago remains beautiful. The Spanish tiles still gleam in the sunlight. The Venetian stonework still frames the doorways. The gardens, though maintained by underpaid workers, are still lush and vibrant. The ballroom, though rented out for weddings and fundraisers, is still breathtaking. The beauty is real, even if it is built on suffering. And that is perhaps the most unsettling truth of all, that something can be both magnificent and monstrous, that beauty and injustice can coexist in the same space, separated only by a velvet rope or a paywall. Before we part, consider this. If you could walk through Mar-a-Lago today, if you could stand in that ballroom beneath those gold-leafed columns, would you see beauty or would you see the cost? Would you admire the craftsmanship or think about the workers who made it possible? Would you feel awe or would you feel anger? And if you felt both, if you felt the pull of beauty and the weight of injustice at the same time, what would that say about you? About us, about the world we've built? The gates of Mar-a-Lago are still closed to most of us. The membership is still $100,000, the annual fees still $14,000. The parties still happen, the champagne still flows, and the members still enjoy the illusion of effortless luxury, maintained by workers whose names they will never know. The estate that Marjorie built as a monument to her fortune has become a monument to something else, the enduring power of wealth to insulate itself from consequences, to privatize beauty and socialize cost, and to turn history into a commodity that can be bought, sold, and rebranded. Marjorie Merriweather Post died believing that she had built something timeless, something that would outlast her and speak to future generations about the possibilities of American ambition. She was right about one thing: Mar-a-Lago has outlasted her, but it does not speak of possibility. It speaks of the limits of ambition untethered from responsibility, of beauty built on suffering, and of wealth that consumes everything it touches. If you've stayed with this story until now, if you've allowed yourself to feel the weight of these contradictions, then you understand something important. These are not simple stories about villains and victims. They are stories about systems, about the way wealth perpetuates itself through generations, about the invisible labor that sustains luxury, and about the cost of a dream that requires others to sacrifice their lives to make it real. These stories matter because they reveal the structures that shape our world, the patterns that repeat across time, and the choices that are available to us if we are willing to see them. Sharing stories like this, discussing them, questioning them, that's how narratives change. That's how we move from passive observation to active understanding. If this story mattered to you, if it challenged you or made you see wealth differently, then let it ripple outward. Let it be part of a larger conversation. The story of Mar-a-Lago is not over. The legal battles continue, the hurricanes keep coming, and the workers keep scrubbing the floors. The estate will outlast Trump, just as it outlasted Marjorie, just as it will outlast all of us. But what it becomes, what it represents, and who it serves, those are questions that are still being answered. And the answers depend on whether we are willing to look past the beauty and see the cost, whether we are willing to ask who pays the price for grandeur, and whether we are willing to demand that the systems that create such inequality be challenged and changed. In the end, Mar-a-Lago is not just a mansion. It is a mirror reflecting back to us the choices we make about wealth, power, and justice, and if we don't like what we see in that mirror, then it is up to us to change it. Because the gates may be closed, but the story is not, and the story, like the estate itself, belongs to all of us. The salt air has been eating away at Mar-a-Lago for nearly a century now, and it shows no signs of stopping. This is the thing about oceanfront estates that no one talks about when they're building monuments to their own greatness. The ocean always wins. The Atlantic doesn't care about your fortune, your lineage, or your political power. It corrodes, it floods, it storms, and it slowly reclaims everything you've tried to build on its edge. The maintenance reports from Mar-a-Lago over the decades read like a chronicle of losing battle after losing battle against nature itself. Rusted balconies, crumbling stone, tile after tile falling from the roof during every hurricane season. The estate requires constant infusions of capital just to stand still, just to prevent complete collapse. And this brings us to a question that has haunted Mar-a-Lago since the day Marjorie finished building it. How long can a monument to wealth survive when the wealth that built it is no longer there? Marjorie had the posthum fortune, billions in today's currency, and even she struggled to keep the estate afloat. Trump converted it into a business model, outsourcing the financial burden to paying members, but that model is fragile. It depends on exclusivity, on the perception that membership at Mar-a-Lago grants access to power and prestige. The moment that perception cracks, the moment the brand is damaged beyond repair, the membership fees dry up. And when that happens, the estate becomes what it has always threatened to become, a beautiful, unsustainable ruin. There are already signs of strain. After the FBI search in 2022, some members quietly let their memberships lapse, unwilling to be associated with a property at the center of a federal criminal investigation. Others stayed, viewing the controversy as proof of Trump's persecution by political enemies, a narrative that only strengthened their loyalty. But the division itself is telling. Mar-a-Lago is no longer just a luxury resort. It has become a political statement, a place where your presence signals your allegiance. And when a business becomes inseparable from political identity, it becomes vulnerable to the collapse of that identity. The workers see this vulnerability more clearly than anyone. They are the ones who notice when the champagne orders decrease, when fewer guests fill the rooms, when the event's calendar has gaps that didn't exist before. They are the ones who hear the whispers among members, the complaints about increased security, the frustrations with media attention. And they are the ones who know that if the club fails, they will be the first to lose their jobs, cast aside without severance or support, invisible once again. One groundskeeper who has worked at Mar-a-Lago for over 15 years and spoke on condition of anonymity described the estate as a beautiful trap. "You work here because the money is better than other places, but not by much," he said. "And you stay because you need the work, but you watch the hurricanes come, you watch the repairs get delayed, you watch the owners change, and you realize that this place is always one disaster away from shutting down. We're all just hoping it lasts long enough for us to retire." That phrase, "one disaster away," captures the precariousness of Mar-a-Lago's existence. The estate sits on a barrier island in one of the most hurricane-prone regions in the United States. Climate change is making storms more frequent and more severe. Sea levels are rising, threatening the very land the estate sits on. Insurance companies are already pulling out of Florida, unwilling to cover properties at such high risk of catastrophic damage. The operating costs are climbing every year, and the asset allocation required to keep the estate functional is staggering. At some point, the math stops working. At some point, even the wealthiest owners realize that pouring money into a sinking ship is not an investment. It's a vanity project. And vanity has always been at the heart of Mar-a-Lago. Marjorie built it to prove that she belonged among the American aristocracy, that her wealth was not just functional but cultural, tied to art and history and beauty. Trump acquired it to prove that he could succeed where others had failed, that he could turn a white elephant into a profit center. Both of them used the estate to construct an identity, to tell a story about who they were and what they represented. But identities are fragile, stories change, and monuments, no matter how grand, eventually crumble. There is a deeper psychological dimension to this obsession with physical monuments to wealth. The rich often speak about legacy, about building something that will outlast them, but what they are really talking about is immortality. They know on some level that their lives are finite, that their power will fade, and that they will be forgotten. So they build. They construct estates, endow institutions, put their names on buildings and foundations and scholarships. They try to anchor themselves in the physical world, to ensure that some part of them remains after they are gone. But the strategy rarely works the way they hope. Legacies are rewritten, names are stripped from buildings. Foundations are disbanded or redirected, and estates like Mar-a-Lago become associated not with the virtues their builders imagined, but with the contradictions they tried to hide. Marjorie wanted to be remembered as a patron of the arts, a woman of taste and refinement who preserved beauty for future generations. Instead, she is remembered, if she is remembered at all, as the woman who built an estate so extravagant that even the federal government didn't want it. Trump wants to be remembered as a brilliant businessman and a transformative political leader, but Mar-a-Lago may ultimately define him differently, as the man who turned a work of art into a private club, a presidential residence into a security risk, and a historical landmark into a legal liability. This is the curse of monuments built on wealth alone, without a foundation of genuine public good, without a connection to something larger than ego and ambition. They become hollow. They may be beautiful, but they are empty, and eventually people see through the facade. If you've listened this far, you already know that these stories are not just about the past. They are about the present, about the systems that continue to concentrate wealth and power in fewer and fewer hands, and about the choices we face as a society. Staying connected to these truths, even when they are uncomfortable, is how change begins. The town of Palm Beach itself has always had a complicated relationship with Mar-a-Lago. The old, money families who have lived there for generations view the estate as gaudy, excessive, and nouveau riche, an embarrassment to the understated elegance they prefer. They fought Trump's conversion of the property into a club not just because of zoning laws, but because they despised what he represented: brash, loud, transactional wealth, the kind that seeks attention rather than avoiding it. To them, Mar-a-Lago is everything wrong with modern American excess, a neon sign in a neighborhood that prides itself on discretion. But their disdain is also hypocritical. The wealth that built Palm Beach was just as exploitative, just as dependent on invisible labor and structural inequality as the wealth that built Mar-a-Lago. The difference is only aesthetic. Old money prefers its exploitation quiet and hidden, while new money flaunts it. But the cost is the same. The workers are still underpaid, the environment is still damaged, the inequality is still crushing. The only thing that changes is the style of the gates that keep people out, and those gates are everywhere in Palm Beach. Tall hedges, security guards, private beaches, members, only clubs. The entire island is designed to exclude, to ensure that only the wealthy can live there, visit there, or even walk freely there. Public beach access is limited and deliberately obscured. Parking is restricted. Local laws make it nearly impossible for service workers to afford housing on the island, forcing them to commute from the mainland, often spending hours in traffic to clean houses and serve meals for people who will never learn their names. Mar-a-Lago is not an aberration in this landscape. It is the landscape, concentrated and made visible. The psychological toll of this kind of service work is profound. Studies have shown that workers in high-end hospitality experience higher rates of depression, anxiety, and chronic stress than those in other industries. The constant performance of deference, the emotional labor of anticipating and meeting the needs of the wealthy, the physical exhaustion of maintaining impossible standards, all of it takes a toll that is rarely acknowledged and never compensated. And when those workers are immigrants, often undocumented or on temporary visas, the power imbalance is even more severe. They cannot complain. They cannot organize. They cannot demand better treatment without risking deportation. They are trapped in a system that extracts their labor and discards them when they are no longer useful. This is the human machinery that keeps places like Mar-a-Lago running. And it is a machinery built on silence, on the understanding that certain people's suffering is the acceptable cost of other people's comfort. The members who pay $100,000 to join the club do not think about the housekeepers who clean their rooms or the cooks who prepare their meals. They do not calculate the gap between what they pay for membership and what the workers earn. They do not see the exhaustion in the eyes of the people who serve them. And if they did see it, they would likely rationalize it. Those workers chose that job. They could leave if they wanted. Everyone has to work hard to get ahead. The rationalizations are endless, and they all serve the same purpose: to absolve the wealthy of responsibility for the systems that benefit them. But responsibility cannot be absolved. It can only be ignored. And the more it is ignored, the more the rot spreads, the more the inequality deepens, and the more fragile the entire structure becomes. Because systems built on exploitation are inherently unstable. They depend on the exploited remaining silent, powerless, and invisible. The moment that silence breaks, the moment those workers organize, speak out, or simply walk away, the entire edifice collapses. And we are seeing that collapse begin, slowly, across industries. Workers are demanding better wages, better conditions, and basic dignity. The old bargain, accept low pay and poor treatment in exchange for survival, is breaking down, and when it breaks down completely, places like Mar-a-Lago will face a reckoning. That reckoning may come in the form of labor shortages, as workers refuse to accept jobs that do not pay a living wage. It may come in the form of legal action, as workers sue for unpaid wages, unsafe conditions, and discrimination. It may come in the form of public outrage, as more people learn about the exploitation that sustains luxury and demand change. Or it may come in the form of environmental collapse, as rising seas and stronger hurricanes make oceanfront estates like Mar-a-Lago impossible to maintain. However it comes, it is coming. The only question is how much suffering will occur before it arrives. And this brings us back to the original question: what is the true cost of a dream that requires others to sacrifice their lives to sustain it? The cost is measured not just in dollars, though the financial toll is immense. It is measured in human lives, in years spent scrubbing floors and tending gardens for wages that barely cover rent. It is measured in broken bodies, in workers who develop chronic pain from repetitive labor and who cannot afford medical care. It is measured in lost potential, in people who could have been artists, teachers, entrepreneurs, but who instead spent their lives in service to someone else's vision of grandeur. And it is measured in moral degradation, in the slow erosion of empathy and solidarity that occurs when we accept that some people's suffering is simply the price of doing business. If this makes you uncomfortable, if it makes you question the systems we participate in, then sit with that discomfort. That is where understanding begins. That is where change becomes possible. And if you believe that these conversations need to continue, that these truths need to be told, even when they are hard to hear, then your engagement matters. Your voice matters, your refusal to look away matters. Mar-a-Lago will stand for a while longer, the tiles will be replaced, the stonework repaired, the gardens maintained. The members will continue to pay their fees, the events will continue to be held, and the workers will continue to serve. But the story is changing, the facade is cracking, and more people are beginning to ask the questions that those in power have always hoped would remain unasked. Who benefits? Who pays? And is it worth it? These are not rhetorical questions. They demand answers. They demand action. And they demand that we stop treating extreme wealth as something to aspire to or admire, and start seeing it for what it often is: a system of extraction that enriches a few by exploiting many, that builds monuments on the backs of invisible workers, and that calls the result success. Until we reckon with that reality, until we demand that wealth come with responsibility and that luxury be built on fairness rather than exploitation, places like Mar-a-Lago will continue to exist. Beautiful, controversial, and built on suffering we refuse to see.